Greetings from the States, from Sir Flint and Debbie Miller. Here in Illinois, we are finally experiencing spring, which is after about 5 months of winter. So it's exciting to see the trees budding, flowers coming up, grass greening. There truly is new life. The birds are singing. It's just something we here in the Midwest of the states we wait for a long time. So I hope everyone is doing well there. And tonight I'm going to be talking about social anxiety and social anxiety disorder. And usually, what we mean by a disorder is when something has become chronic and stays there. So, we're going to be talking about that. And I just want to say, our first two topics were panic disorder and agoraphobia, which is fear of going out of the house, fear of people. And then we talked in two sessions about post traumatic stress disorder. And all of these topics, so much more could be learned, but you hopefully are getting a basic foundation for these. And tonight, as I said, social anxiety disorder. And so, really, you're going to hear some parallel and similarities with the social anxiety that you got in panic disorder and post traumatic stress syndrome. But each of these three topics are unique and there is some overlap, but I am amazed um, coming back from the Philippines 14 and a half years ago how much of American culture and society, how many people not only have anxiety, depression, especially since the pandemic, but how many people I have found out as I've got to know them that have um, social anxiety. And it is something that I have rarely experienced, but I know it now when I see it in a person. And knowing it helps me to understand that person better. And it can be very debilitating for that person who has social anxiety. So, with that, we'll get started. I hope to send a basic outline later with this. Our youngest son, Christopher, is coming from Texas for about 4 days. So I wanted to get this video done and sent off to Chaplain Nato. So here we go. When social anxiety is persistent and pervasive, all absorbing in a person, it can lead to a diagnosis of social anxiety disorder, which then becomes a disabling condition that makes social interactions of all types stressful and challenging. Social anxiety disorder emerges from a confluence of factors, including possibly genetic predisposition, childhood experiences, and unusual brain functioning. So, despite the difficulties that social anxiety creates for sufferers, it is highly responsive to treatment and symptoms can be managed. So, that is very good. Good news. So, there are about about six bullets that I will talk about. And like I said, this video is supposed to be, 20 to 30 minutes. So I'm just going to kind of whiz by these, but I will send some notes for you all since I don't have it on a PowerPoint display. The first one is defining social anxiety and social anxiety disorder. And I've already briefly defined it, but it is social anxiety when someone's ability to socialize, interact, communicate with other people particularly in social settings and one-on-one. So if a person is experiencing social anxiety, full blown, ongoing, chronically, then the symptoms can be very overwhelming and debilitating and seemingly beyond that person's control of those symptoms. So it is something that occurs, and I'm sure if you all there in the Philippines in your culture, you've experienced post-traumatic stress syndrome and also um, what else did I say I did? Oh, panic disorder. Then some of you or your family or friends or church mates may have social anxiety. The defining characteristics include, um, let's see, let me turn my paper here. Intense fear of social interactions. Anticipatory anxiety that leads social anxiety sufferers to avoid opportunities for conversation or public speaking. Then number 3, extreme symptoms of anxiety experienced during unwanted or stressful social interactions. The next one, poor verbal communication skills, complicated by a person's inability to think clearly while having the anxiety or almost like a panic attack. So communication breaks down, the words don't come, the more anxiety sets in. The next one, overly critical self-evaluation of that person's performance after conversations or social interactions or spoken presentations. I know you all have done your verbatims and spoken presentations and probably experienced some anxiety. And you can determine after this session if you think it was social anxiety. So low self-evaluation, a person is just very critical of themselves. No matter what kind of job they do, they just feel very critical, self-critical. And the last symptom is usually a very low self-esteem and a lack of confidence, which are reinforced over and over by that self-criticism they give themselves. So it's really a lot of mental, as is with the panic disorder, and how we learned we could help manage PTSD. So when not interacting with close friends or family, people with severe social anxiety have a deep-seated fear of being, and this is important, being judged, being rejected, embarrassed, or humiliated during social interactions. That deep-seated fear, it is a true fear um, comes out, and these things go through a person's mind. Excuse me. If I say what I think or feel, will I be judged? Will I be rejected? Will I be embarrassed with myself, my interaction, my communication? Will I be end up being humiliated in the course of the conversation? And these fears are what we call irrational fears, um, and or we may perceive them, but in fact, maybe people are not thinking any of those four things: judging, rejecting, and making you feel a person feel embarrassed or humiliated. But these are the self perceptions of the sufferer with social anxiety. So and then the second bullet point. So the first bullet point was defining social anxiety and social anxiety disorder. And the big difference is social anxiety can be very temporary, pass quickly, not as much self criticism and feeling of I'm going to be rejected, and not as chronic, ongoing. So the genetic causes, which this was interesting to me when I did the research, was that people with a parent or parents who've suffered from social anxiety disorder, and maybe they didn't even know it when they did suffer with it, but there is a 30 to 40% greater likelihood of a child developing the condition themselves. However, it's impossible to know how much of the parent child social anxiety association is based on genetics and how much is based on parenting style, which is naturally affected by the presence of any social anxiety disorder. But recent research into specific genetic markers, which the world of science is just exploding with learning about the genes in our body, markers. They have focused on changes in a gene called capital S, capital L, capital C, capital G, capital A, 4. And it seems to be related to the predisposition of social anxiety, possibility of, you know, uh, the panic disorders. That's the word I was looking for. Um, so, and this particular gene marker that I just gave you is involved in the transport of the neurotransmitter serotonin. You spell that serotonin. And that is a chemical in the brain, one of the three neurotransmitters. And this serotonin helps soothe nerves and stabilize moods. So both shortages and excesses of serotonin have been linked to anxiety symptoms. And so maybe people with social anxiety disorder struggle to produce enough serotonin consistently, and that might possibly add to this disorder. Um, so that's interesting news. The third bullet content is social anxiety and the brain. This is also very interesting in science and the medical field. Brain scans have revealed that people with social anxiety disorder suffer from hyperactivity in a part of the brain known as the amygdala. The amygdala is responsible for the physiological changes associated with fight or flight response when there is fear, danger, which mobilizes the body to respond then to perceived threats, real or imagined. So, how many times in our lifetime have we experienced that emotion of flight or fight? So, the action in the amygdala um, triggers this avalanche of symptoms identified with intense anxiety, and some of these are the same as panic attacks: rapid heartbeat, sweaty palms, respiratory alertness, excitement, muscle tightening, a surge in blood sugar levels, and a freezing of the brain that leaves anxiety sufferers unable to think or reasonably uh, be reasonable in their thought processes. And so when people experience this surge of anxiety, and mental focus then shifts from the to a part of the brain from the amygdala where all the emotions and feelings come out to the prefrontal cortex of the brain in the front area. It is the job of the prefrontal cortex to calm those reactions by assessing them in a rational and calm way. And if no real threat is present, it's supposed to send signals to back to the amygdala that diffuse the anxious response. Isn't that just so interesting how God has designed every part of our body to work? And when it's a little out of balance, or it's been through stress or trauma, it affects every part. The body is totally integrated. But God has put healing, the body can heal itself with, and especially with God's power. It can reroute blood vessels. It can replenish nerves. It can fight off illnesses. It's made to keep living, you might say. So, but in anxiety, social anxiety sufferers, the prefrontal cortex actually amplifies the amygdala instead of calming it. So, you know, with social anxiety sufferers that are very more severe and chronic, instead of the prefrontal cortex doesn't do its job. And so instead of calming it, it amplifies the activity and response going on. So they have this, it causes people to have this entrenched fear of, and this is the brain doing this, the mind, entrenched fear of people's reactions. And then their brain and the mind interprets social interactions as legitimate threats, and no amount of rational reflection can completely soothe those fears. So, in this way, you can understand how the body's working the mind, the brain, and so it needs help. It needs help to try to get back to functioning in a more normal way. I am going to send you these, my notes, but here is a picture of the brain that I've been talking about, and you will see where the amygdala is. Let me make sure I'm pointing to the right. It's right there right off the brain stem going into the brain. And then the cerebral cortex is the very front of the brain. And so, right up here on your forehead, behind your forehead. And so, that's what's going on. This is a really neat, simple diagram of the brain. You see the cerebellum, the brain stem, the hypothalamus, which our hypothalamus controls our metabolic body processes and hormone production, and oh goodness, temperature of the body to maintain temperature. So there's a lot of important functions in the brain. But anyway, there it is. Okay. So, and fortunately, the brains can be reprogrammed to form new circuits, new pathways. The neurons can make new neuron pathways and connections. Guess what? At any age. Yay! Yay, I say. With the help of, this is a familiar term, cognitive behavioral therapy. You know that word, that title is the preferred form of therapy for social anxiety, cognitive behavioral therapy, where the counselor helps um, the counselee, first of all, understand the negative thinking patterns that are causing certain behaviors. And then you rethink and reformat those thinking patterns and feelings and emotions to then change the behavior. It's a very wonderful form of counseling. So it's good to know that our brains can be retrained and we can learn to react more rationally. And I can really identify with this. On the Myers-Briggs, I'm a F, I'm a strong F, which is feeling, how I process my world around me through feelings, and sensing, I'm an S. So I have to sometimes really stop and practice and think. I need to logically think through this. So that's me. I don't. That's just a little tidbit. Even after all these years, I'm still learning to do that, especially in certain situations that come up. My immediate reaction is emotional reaction. Okay, enough about me. The third bullet is the effect of parenting styles on social anxiety. Extensive research has confirmed a connection between a negative parenting style and anxiety disorders, including social anxiety disorder. So you may have taken some parenting classes and also in your chaplain training. Everybody, I'm convinced, needs parenting classes. And now I'm a grandparent of a 2.5-year old, and a lot of those parenting memories are coming back for me. But I don't know what I would have done. We didn't live near family when we had Ben and Chris, and I tried to reach out and learn and get books and go to some parenting seminars and things in our church. And I just look back and I think, I don't know what I would have done. And I know I wasn't the perfect parent raising children. But, we can all identify our negative parenting styles early on and realize how they can impact a child's anxiety level. Um, when parents are over controlling, quick to criticize, reluctant to show affection, or overly concerned with the opinions of others, a child's self image and A child's self-image and impression is of the world can be shaped by words and actions associated with these characteristics. So their worldview that they need to hold back to be fearful or be, um, you know, overly controlled, and they think everyone is like that, or their world is shaped by parents. Children and adolescents may become more fearful and less trustful of other people or authority figures when they are raised in this kind of environment, and their self esteem and self confidence may be negatively impacted as well. Social anxiety order is usually not diagnosed until sufferers reach adulthood. But get this, symptoms tend to be manifested first in late childhood or early adolescence. And some children, everybody is wired differently. But I noticed a baseline high anxiety level in Ben by the age of 5. And I'm sure I wasn't doing anything to help that, not knowing everything I know now. But, as far as a formal medical psychological diagnosis, it's usually not until someone gets into counseling that in adulthood, and it comes out in their home life and their work life and all of that, that it's formally diagnosed. But it can show up in late childhood or early adolescence. Okay, I wish I were there in person to see if you had any questions, but as always, you can messenger me. We're going to talk about a few or more things: environmental influences and stressful life experiences as a cause of social anxiety, and social anxiety triggers. Um, what do you think, based on what I've said already, could be some of the environmental influences and part of stressful lives that can cause, exasperate social anxiety? I'll let you think about that for a moment. Um, we've brought this up in PTSD, panic attacks, stressful life events, and trauma during childhood can influence not only the developmental stages of a child's life, but also it can influence the development of this social anxiety problem. Some of the exposures known to have predictive value for severe social anxiety. Now, this is going from mild social anxiety to very severe, and you may know some people with very severe. I know one or two. Um, if they have in their past physical, sexual, or emotional abuse that has been ongoing, severe bullying or teasing by peers, family conflicts, domestic violence, and divorce. I know in your country, in your culture, divorce is not common among the Catholic Church, but here in America, it's very common. And so, it's almost like people don't think about it anymore, the impact that it has on children. And there are those situations where maybe divorce is the best option for the good of the whole. But a lot of family conflicts and domestic violence can cause social anxiety disorder. And then the death of a parent or desertion by a parent. And then a child that sees maternal stress during pregnancy or infancy, the mother is not at her best, and dealing with all that, the child observes it and absorbs some of it. So traumatic experiences can reinforce the idea that the world is scary, an unpredictable place. It is an unpredictable place, and it can be especially shocking or disheartening to kids to discover that their caregivers are capable of selfish or hurtful behavior. Another exposure or things that trigger social anxiety is speaking on the phone. Some people don't do well with that. In your culture, it's text messages are the main communication. At least they were when we were there. But here, if you or speak to a stranger on the phone, a lot of people aren't good with that, or speaking publicly. Um, and then the last one is actually some people do not do well with therapy or talk therapy or support groups they, because of all the influence of social anxiety, they are just kind of blocked by that. So they don't do as well. Um, Let's see. Just know that people with severe social anxiety disorder will go to great lengths to avoid these kind of exposures if they can. And the same with post-traumatic stress disorder that we've learned about. Um, so, finding help for social anxiety disorder. Undiagnosed and untreated disorder is a devastating condition that can sometimes severely limit daily functioning. Same kind of thing if post traumatic stress disorder just gets really, really, really bad. It inhibits daily functioning of life. And when social anxiety sufferers realize they have a serious problem, they may have difficulty even asking for help. And since therapists, psychotherapists, psychologists, counselors are authority figures, and people with social anxiety disorder generally avoid interaction with authority figures if they can. So, just a little background to keep that in the back of your mind. But social anxiety disorder is highly responsive to treatment, and when sufferers do summon the courage to ask for help, they often achieve great results, both short term and long term. So that's very good news. The other part of treating it is medication. Um, Antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications are often prescribed for people with social anxiety disorder, especially if it's more than mild and happens every once in a while. But psychotherapy is the core of the social anxiety treatment. It is the best. It has to happen. Um, most treatment for social anxiety takes place on an outpatient basis, or going to see a counselor or a chaplain that is trained, or a clergy person that is trained. But if things are so severe, like with panic attacks and PTSD, sometimes people will go into withdrawal so much and become so depressed and so isolated that they need inpatient and so treatment. Okay. Let's see. I think that covers most of what I wanted to cover tonight. Um, let's see. Oh, one more thing. Triggers. I know we've kind of talked about triggers in here, but um, it's important to know that social anxiety, um, people suffering from it, do not experience its symptoms in every social situation. So it's not cookie cutter in every social situation. When they have interactions with people they know well, are certain they can trust, whether that be partners, parents, siblings, children, grandparents, close friends, longtime employers, favorite teachers, etc., they may show no signs of social anxiety whatsoever. And if they're asked to speak in public about subjects where they have expertise or a record of accomplishment, they may be able to do so with some degree of confidence, and the social anxiety will not happen as much. But other situations can evoke great distress and anxiety, even though to other people they wouldn't be as threatening to most other people. So here's some of the common triggers: meeting new people, dating, interactions with authority figures, conversations with extroverts. Why do you think that's so? Extroverts just can talk and talk and talk to almost anybody, and they just put themselves out there, right? So it may be very hard for someone that is introvert or more shy or has the social anxiety to just have to talk with a extrovert. Parties, especially if the social anxiety sufferer is attending alone, which in your culture that doesn't happen very often, I imagine. Large family gatherings where not everyone is familiar probably doesn't happen in your culture very often. Unexpected attempts to initiate conversations by others in public places. So, what that means is like when someone is standing in a line at a bank or grocery store or whatever, and someone just starts talking. And for a social anxiety disorder person, that's very challenging if that's a stranger. When you're being teased or kidded, people with social anxiety take that very, very personal. And being watched, when a person is with social anxiety is being watched while performing a new or unfamiliar task, or being asked to speak in front of a class or a room full of coworkers. I would say even people without a social anxiety disorder, if you're presenting something for the first time and you're in a new class with classmates, co-workers at a job or whatever, it's anxiety producing. So so these are especially hard for social anxiety sufferers because when you're being asked to speak or suddenly start a conversation with a stranger, the world is shaped by words and actions. And so remember, these sufferers, when anxiety just paralyzes them, they don't have the confidence, but they also don't have the words that they feel they just shut down. This is in rather, severe cases. Um, and then just remember that children and adolescents can become more fearful and less trustful of other people when they're raised in a anxiety environment. And let's see. Okay, so I think that about covers it. I didn't even watch my clock, so Chaplain Nato, I don't know how long this is. You may want to cut it in half. But anyway, I've enjoyed talking about this topic, and I value your reflections and your feedback, any questions, and I am grateful for each one of you going through CPE. All right, until we meet again, I'll try to remember to get some documents off to Nato, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.